ANC had a militant wing, and at some point they became so involved in the democratic process, the militant wing closed down, and Nelson Mandela emerged. And it was a wonderful change for all the majority of the people in South Africa.
Arafat and Abbas and all those people also, they used to be in a military wing. Now they are our biggest allies. And how are you going to solve the problem in Palestine without talking to Hamas?
Exactly. And so what Humanitarian Law Project was saying is that that's exactly what they wanted to do. They want to convince these people to close the military wing and to only use their political wing. And this federal law says you can't do it, or if you do it, you're going to come this close to violating a crime.
Let's talk about this guy from McAllister, Radisson, whatever his name is.
From William Mitchell, John Radisson, the professor.
Yeah, Professor Radisson was saying, basically was saying, you don't even come close because if you are helping in a non-violent way, you are releasing resources that might use it in violent way.
That's what a majority of the court held in this Holder versus Humanitarian Law Project. And the problem with that is, and he's exactly right, that's what the court held, is that if you can't even come close, what that's going to do is have a chilling effect on all the legitimate First Amendment activity, political activity, advocacy activity that would come right up to this line. So what the dissent said in Holder versus Humanitarian Law, 3 of the Supreme Court justices, they said if the prosecution involves speech, they should have to prove, in order to make this statute constitutional, that you were willing to support the violent parts of the organization.
Sounds good.
If they did that, then you wouldn't have the chilling effect on the First Amendment. And the other route, just to say Congress can do this, pass these kinds of scare laws, chills all the First Amendment conduct that comes anywhere close, because now the advice from Agent Bolter here and from John Radisson there was, if an organization is on that list, stay away. Well, that's not how we make the world a better place.
Well, that's not a practical way, because sometimes you are involved in so many different ways, and you know, it could be indirectly. You don't even know what you're doing at them. Maybe, you know, some. Let's talk about.
You asked a perfect question. You said, "What if you're going to contribute to the hospital?"
Yes.
And you're going to bring those kind of materials, or you're going to go volunteer, and that sort of thing. It raises the exact question. You know, when I went to Iraq, I brought these huge containers of medical supplies. Why? Because the sanctions there had barred so many medical supplies, people didn't have anything except aspirins. You know, they didn't have adequate medical care. And if you have a humanitarian bone in your body, you don't want to see innocent kids, you know, sick and dying without any medical help.
What I wonder is, you know, you have this right-wing evangelical Christian Zionist Tea Parties. They want the government off our back. They want to dismantle the federal government. But when it comes to interfering in our rights and First Amendment, they don't mind that. But I don't understand. The government off our back, off our Social Security, whatever, but when it comes to heavy-handed for our First Amendment and freedom, I don't see any dissent from that side of the aisle.
No, I think primarily because they think of America as it is for me, not for you.
So it's
because I'm Christian, and it is for, you know, them, that is the Americans of the 1900 view, rather than the Americans who maybe came to this country.
70% of Arabs or Arab America are Christian. And I don't think they benefit from this First Amendment.
I don't think they do, because as soon as someone sees them with a beard, they say, I get nervous, because they assume they're Muslim, and they assume that all Muslims are probably bad Muslims, whatever that term means.
Well, you know, Wayne Williams in public radio, NPR, was fired because he said, when I see somebody is wearing a garment or like a Muslim, I'm scared. And they fired him for that.
Yeah.
And this is, you know, organizations It's a political correct. I don't think I have a problem with I have a problem when he was hired, not when he was fired, because that guy doesn't make any sense. I mean, yeah, civil rights and all that, but he's just a domesticated black, not to scare whites. He's just made to not to scare the white audience. But what I'm saying is, as an Arab, and traditionally we are grow up fighting for 60 years with the Israelis. I mean, I was in '73 war, and 7 of my families were killed in wars with the Israelis. And could I make a case, and maybe this is far-fetched, that thousands of Americans who go to Israel and fight, join the army, join the settler, they grab land, they kill Arabs, they are indoctrinated to hate the Arabs, they are dogs, whatever are indoctrinated there in Israel. And they come back here. I would like to know them. I'd like to see if I'm flying and on a flight, I want to see if somebody on the flight, that scares me, not an Arab wearing a hijab or whatever. So if the idea is somebody is scary, we need to know, like what the people went, the Somali youth travel to Somalia to fight and join whatever the case was, join Shabab, whatever. There is some youth, they thought their country is in a civil war. They went to fight whatever. I'm not sure all of them were right. Some of them went for evil things, but some of them went to fight in their country. Same thing as with some of the Americans. They go to Israel to fight for whatever they think they're right. Is there a case there? Is there comparability there, or this is different because Shabab is a terrorist, Israel is not?
Well, it depends on your country's foreign policy, doesn't it?
So is it a legal issue?
In other words, if the country's foreign policy is aligned with a particular country and that country is involved in violent acts, it is not called terrorism. If your country is against some other group, then you look at that group's violence as terrorism. Whereas, so terrorism is a very political term. As a non-political term, it could just be used in a very neutral way, and this would break down on violence and nonviolence. In other words, if you just used a very neutral term, a theological term, why don't you read that term I gave you?
Well, terrorism is the international effort to generate fear through violence or threat of violence, and the further effort to harness these fears in pursuit of some goals.
See, that would be really
anybody
a neutral thing, and then you could look at terrorism would be the use of violence and intimidation and fear to further some goals. It wouldn't say you have to be on this side or that side of a particular conflict. Well, so if you really think of it in those terms, then the dividing line is violence and nonviolence, and that those who would use political and nonviolent means would be within the theory rather than the particular laws of a country, and those who don't would be outside of it.
How is it different from the court definition? The addition or the explanation by the court for the First Amendment under the Patriot Act or War on Terrorism.
So the terrorism laws for the United States are written in terms of terrorists are those who are going to use fear or violence to intimidate the government to break down the government services. And so there's a real legitimate means there, but the whole definition is very interesting because it is completely dependent on our foreign policy. In other words, just like you're saying, if Hamas, who has the majority of people in Gaza, were recognized as a government, elected government, and we recognized Hamas, then of course we'd have to take them off the terrorist list because they wouldn't be against us.
They're not. As of now, they are not.
They would be part of us. But as long as we don't recognize them, they can be on the terrorist list, and we allow Israel, or with our support, to use violence against them. because they shoot rockets, into
Well, if the
Israel.
idea of all this to protect our security,
Right.
this policy, and it's not. It's make us less secure, alienate millions of people, and somebody could make the case that supporting Israel is really the one is really threatening our security.
Well,
And so people made that case before.
Yeah. And so you get into what are the intentions